Nick Chubb is at the center of a contract situation that's way more complicated and way more explosive than anyone realizes. And what's actually being discussed behind closed doors isn't a simple restructure to help the Browns' salary cap. According to sources who've been in the room for recent conversations between Chubb's representation and multiple NFL teams, the Browns are trying to force Chubb to accept a massive pay cut by threatening to cut him entirely if he doesn't comply. And Chubb's camp is responding by threatening to retire instead of accepting what they view as extortion. But here's where this gets absolutely wild. Three other teams have secretly contacted Chubb's agent offering to trade for him at his current contract value and pay him everything he's owed, which would make this whole Browns pressure campaign backfire spectacularly. And the real reason the Browns are so desperate to restructure Chubb's deal has nothing to do with saving the 2026 season from a football perspective. It's about Jimmy Haslam needing immediate cap relief to make the stadium financing work with the banks and investors who are funding the Brook Park project, because Haslam personally guaranteed portions of the stadium debt, and if the Browns' salary cap situation looks too unstable, those financial backers could pull out and collapse the entire stadium deal. This isn't about football. This is about Haslam using Nick Chubb as a financial pawn to save his real estate project, while destroying what's left of the locker room's trust. The rumor started circulating late Thursday night when a prominent NFL insider tweeted cryptically that the Browns were exploring creative financial solutions with several veteran players to create cap space. By Friday morning, multiple sources were confirming that Nick Chubb was the primary target of these efforts and that conversations about restructuring his contract had been ongoing for several days. But what those initial reports described as routine cap management discussions between a team and a player, the reality, according to sources who've been briefed on the actual conversations, is far uglier and far more coercive than normal contract restructure negotiations. According to sources, the Browns called Nick Chubb into a meeting on Wednesday, February 18th, just one day before the Player Revolt press conference, and presented him with what they framed as a choice, but what sources describe as an ultimatum. The Browns' representatives, according to sources, told Chubb that his current contract, which still has 2 years remaining at approximately $12 million per season, is unsustainable given the team's salary cap situation. They explained that between Deshaun Watson's contract disaster, the expenses associated with building the new stadium, and other financial obligations, the team needs immediate cap relief, and they're asking Chubb to help by accepting a restructured deal that would pay him significantly less in 2026 and 2027, but that could include incentives that would allow him to earn back some of the money if he performs well. The specific numbers being proposed, according to sources, would cut Chubb's 2026 salary from $12 million to approximately $6 million guaranteed, with up to $4 million in performance incentives that would be extremely difficult to achieve, given that Chubb is coming back from a serious knee injury and the Browns' offensive situation is uncertain. Over 2 years, the restructure would save the Browns approximately $8 to $10 million in cap space, while costing Chubb that same amount in real money. When Chubb's agent pushed back and asked why Chubb should accept a massive pay cut when he's played out his contract honorably and is still recovering from an injury he sustained while playing for Cleveland, the Browns' response, according to sources, was shockingly blunt. They said that if Chubb doesn't accept the restructure, the team will release him before the season starts, which would allow them to clear his entire contract off the books, but would leave Chubb as a 30-year-old running back coming off a major injury, trying to sign with a new team in a weak running back market, where he might not get anything close to his current deal. That threat, that implicit message of take less money or we'll cut you and you might end up with nothing, is what sources describe as the coercive part of this situation. The Browns are using Chubb's injury recovery and age as leverage to force him to accept below-market compensation, banking on the fact that Chubb might be scared enough about his uncertain market value to accept the bad deal rather than risk free agency. But what the Browns apparently didn't anticipate is that Chubb, who's made over $40 million in his career and who has his financial house in order, isn't desperate enough to accept what he views as exploitation. According to sources, when Chubb's agent relayed the Browns' position to him, Chubb's response was that he'd rather retire than accept a deal he views as disrespectful and coerced, and that if the Browns cut him, he'll take his time evaluating his options rather than rushing to sign somewhere out of desperation. That retirement threat is significant because if Chubb actually follows through, it would be a PR disaster for the Browns. Having a beloved player who battled back from a devastating injury choose retirement over continuing to play for your organization because you tried to force him to take a pay cut would be another data point in the growing narrative that the Browns are toxic to good players. But sources say Chubb is serious about it, that he's been thinking about life after football anyway, and that he's not bluffing when he says he'd rather walk away than be exploited. But here's where this situation takes a dramatic turn that the Browns didn't see coming. According to sources familiar with the trade market, at least 3 NFL teams have contacted Chubb's agent over the past several days to inquire about whether Chubb would be interested in being traded to their organization at his current contract without any restructure. These teams, according to sources, are contenders who believe that adding a healthy Nick Chubb to their roster could be the difference between making the playoffs and winning a championship, and they're willing to pay him his full contract value to get him. The specific teams haven't been publicly identified, but sources say they include at least one NFC contender and at least one AFC team that doesn't compete with Cleveland in the division. This trade interest completely changes the dynamics of the Browns' negotiation with Chubb because it gives him leverage he wouldn't otherwise have. If the Browns cut Chubb rather than restructuring his deal, they get nothing, and Chubb hits free agency, where his market might be uncertain. But if the Browns trade Chubb to one of these interested teams, they could get draft pick compensation, Chubb gets to keep his full contract, and the team acquiring him gets a Pro Bowl running back. That's the rational outcome that benefits everyone except Jimmy Haslam's immediate cap relief needs, which is why, according to sources, Haslam is resisting the trade option and continuing to pressure Chubb to restructure. The real reason behind Haslam's urgency to get Chubb's restructure done, according to sources with knowledge of the stadium financing, is that the banks and private investors providing debt financing for the Brook Park Stadium project have been doing due diligence on the Browns' financial situation and have raised concerns about the team's salary cap management. These financial institutions, according to sources, are looking at the Browns owing Deshaun Watson $90 million, having committed to expensive stadium financing obligations, and potentially facing legal costs from the Wyatt Teller situation and other issues, and they're questioning whether the organization's finances are stable enough to support the debt load that Haslam is taking on. Haslam personally guaranteed portions of the stadium financing, which means if the project fails or if the Browns can't meet their obligations, Haslam's personal assets could be at risk. Creating immediate salary cap relief through Chubb's restructure would improve the Browns' financial appearance on paper and make the bankers more comfortable, which is why Haslam is pushing this so aggressively despite the football and PR downsides. The reaction from inside the Browns' locker room to the rumors about Chubb being pressured to restructure has been exactly what you'd expect given everything else that's happening. According to sources, multiple players have reached out to Chubb privately to express support and to tell him not to accept a bad deal just to help ownership fix cap problems they created. Myles Garrett, according to sources, specifically told Chubb that the organization's cap issues are not Chubb's responsibility to solve, especially after everything Chubb is sacrificed physically for this team. Other veterans have echoed that sentiment, and according to sources, the general feeling in the locker room is that if the Browns force Chubb out, or if Chubb retires because he won't accept exploitation, it will be viewed as yet another failure of leadership that proves everything the players said in their revolt press conference. Todd Monken, the head coach, is reportedly frustrated that contract negotiations with one of his key offensive players are happening without his input and in ways that could cost him a talented running back just as he's trying to build an offense around a young quarterback, whether that's Malik Willis or eventually Shadur Sanders. According to sources, Monken has advocated internally for keeping Chubb at his current contract and finding cap relief elsewhere, but he's been overruled by ownership who view Chubb as the easiest target because of his injury situation and age. The NFL Players Association is aware of the Chubb situation and, according to sources, is monitoring it closely as part of the broader pattern of Browns player treatment issues that came out of the Wyatt Teller situation. If the NFLPA determines that the Browns are using coercive tactics in the Chubb negotiation, threatening to cut him if he doesn't restructure, that could potentially form the basis for a grievance claiming the team is negotiating in bad faith or violating the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing that exists in employment contracts. The media coverage of the Chubb restructure rumors has been largely sympathetic to Chubb and critical of the Browns, with most analysts pointing out that Chubb is one of the few Browns who's actually earned every dollar he's been paid through consistent high-level performance and professionalism. The optics of pressuring a player who suffered a devastating injury while playing for your team to take less money so that ownership can fix cat problems they created with bad decisions like the Deshaun Watson contract. Those optics are terrible and further damage an organization that's already facing historic levels of criticism and dysfunction.
As of now, the situation remains unresolved. According to sources, Chubb has not agreed to any restructure and is waiting to see what develops with the trade interest and with the Browns' willingness to negotiate in good faith rather than through threats. The Browns, according to sources, are holding firm on their position that they need cap relief and that Chubb needs to help provide it or face being cut. And the three teams interested in trading for Chubb are waiting to see if the Browns will be reasonable about facilitating a trade or if Haslam's stubbornness will force the situation to an ugly conclusion. The deadline for a decision, according to sources, is approaching quickly because the Browns need to finalize their cap situation before free agency begins in mid-March. If they're going to cut Chubb, trade him, or restructure him, they need to do it soon so they know how much cap space they have to work with. That time pressure is giving Chubb some leverage because the Browns can't afford to let this drag on indefinitely. But it's also creating pressure on Chubb to make a decision about whether he's willing to call the Browns' bluff about cutting him. What happens over the next week will determine not just Nick Chubb's future, but will serve as another test of whether the Browns' dysfunction under Jimmy Haslam has reached a point where even routine business decisions become crises that damage the organization. If Chubb retires or gets traded because the Browns tried to coerce him into a bad restructure, it's another star player gone, another example of organizational failure, another reason for free agents to avoid Cleveland and for current players to want out. And it's all happening because an owner is so desperate to make his stadium financing work that he's willing to sacrifice his team's morale and competitive prospects to improve his balance sheet.